Well, hello teachers and tinkerers. Welcome back to TinkerCAD here. Today I would like to just spend a few minutes showing you how to use the Workplane tool. It's to your advantage to do some really cool things. This will speak to your hearts, especially if you are just a little bit OCD about how things are spaced within your work plane and on or into your object. So hopefully you'll find this tutorial helpful. A couple things that I do right off the bat with every one of my new projects is I will rename it. Today what I'm going to be working on is a conductive phone charger stand, and I'm going to go ahead and name that V1. And the other thing that I'd like to do is I like to change my work plane, my initial work plane size to the same size as my build plate in my printer. So if we were using a FlashForge Finder, for example, if you go look at the tech specs on the FlashForge Finder, it's 140 by 140. So we're going to go ahead and set that and click Update Grid, and you'll see that it does size your grid down a little bit. So what that does is it gives you better perspective when you're building your objects as to how much of your work plane those objects are going to fill. Okay, so we've renamed our file, we've changed our build plate size, and I think we're ready to go ahead and move forward with the project. So something that I've been meaning to make for quite a while is a conductive phone charger stand for my desk here in my classroom. I went ahead and purchased a cheapo $5 Five Below conductive phone charger that I should note comes does not include the USB cable, but I paid $5 for it at Five Below, and I'd like to design something to house that charger and to set my phone on my desk. So before I get started, just a little disclaimer, it is TinkerCAD. I will make mistakes as I'm working through this tutorial, so just forgive me for those little mistakes as I'm kind of working through the project. This is only the second time that I've built the project, and I'm kind of going off of memory. So there's one more thing that Dave Pym actually taught me at the last professional development day, and that is to always bring your ruler tool out to your work plane. Super, super helpful tip, because what it does is as you drag your pieces, your shapes onto your work plane, it's going to show you whichever shape you have highlighted, it's going to show you its exact dimensions at all times, and it's also going to allow you to edit those dimensions to whatever you would like them to be. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to bring a box shape out, and what I'd like to highlight, or what I'd like to point out, is anytime you drag a new shape out, you'll notice that it's dropping it nice and flat on this this work plane, the original work plane for the project. Even if I brought a sphere out, it would sit tangentially on that work plane. Okay, I'm going to delete that sphere because we're not using it for this project, but I'm going to bring a box out and I'm going to drop it right on the work plane. And I'm just referring to my other project file here. My box needs to be, let's see, 35 by 75. So I'm going to go ahead, and you'll see the ruler features pop up here. So we're going to go 75 by 35. This is based off of my project file and the other project I'm working on. And then I had a height on this block of 150 millimeters. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to zoom out, shift my perspective around a little bit on my work plane, and this is the block that I'm going to build my entire project around. Okay, so I'm going to work through this quickly, but I'm going to show you how to use this work plane tool to get things nice and neatly aligned as you work your way through a project. So the next shape that I want to bring out is going to be a wedge. I'm going to bring it out, and I'm going to drop it right here. Again, flat on this blue work plane. I want the bottom surface to be uniform for all of these objects that I'm bringing out. Now, here's where the first work plane trick is going to come into play. So I need to go ahead and size this up properly. We need 150. There's my first mistake. We need this to be 150 millimeters high. So we're going to go ahead and fix that. I need it to be 75 millimeters wide. And I had the depth on this one set at 22 in my other project. Okay, so if we look at this perspective, you can see that these two shapes aren't touching. And what I'd like them to do is when this final product prints, I actually want these two objects to be fused or joined so that they are one item. Okay, so if we look at it from this perspective as well, we can see they're not aligned to center of each other. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to align them to center of each other. I did that by first clicking one shape, holding down the Shift key, and then clicking a second shape. That selects multiple objects. And then I come up to my Align tool. And if I click on the Align tool, you'll see these black dots appear that let me align my two objects to each other. Now you'll see once they are aligned, the dots get grayed out and you cannot actually click on them. Also, I should note that with alignment, if you hover over the alignment tool, it will actually give you a preview of how those shapes would be overlaid or merged on top of each other. Now, we can't use these because what they will do is they'll actually put this wedge inside of this rectangular prism. So this is where our work plane tool is going to come in handy. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click off my objects so I don't have anything selected. And I'm going to come up to the work plane tool. I'm going to click on it one time. And I'm going to bring it out to my workspace. And you can see as I move it around my workspace, the orientation of this tool changes. Okay, so that's flat on the original work plane. This is upright on the original work plane. And if I kind of rotate around a little bit and get a glimpse in between these two shapes, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this work plane right inside in between these two shapes, and I'm going to click on that surface. So now what it's done is it has taken the emphasis off of the original blue work plane and it's put it on this new orange work plane. So here is what this trick allows us to do. If I click on this shape, okay, and I look at my cone for height adjustment or distance of the bottom of this shape relative to the work plane, if I grab this cone and I move it toward or away from the work plane, you can see that this number 14, which is currently 14, as I move it away, it increases. As I move it towards, it decreases. If I set this to 0 and I hit enter, it will actually glue those two pieces together right on that flat plane that was on the surface, which is now inside of this red rectangular prism. Okay? So the one thing that I struggled with for the longest time was figuring out how to get rid of this orange work plane. I wanted to go back to my original blue work plane. So like, let's say I brought another wedge shape out. What it would do is it would drop it on this orange work plane instead of on this blue work plane. That's where it would place it. Let me go ahead and delete that. So the way that you get rid of this orange work plane is actually one of the simplest things to do. All you have to do is come back up to the work plane tool, click it once, and set it on top of your original blue work plane, which is still outlined there, and click. And you're back to square one. You've now fused these two pieces together, surface to surface, perfectly without sinking one into the other, and you're ready to move forward with the next part of your project. So the next part of this project, I had to add another wedge, and the trick with this one is it's not facing the right way, so I'll show you how to use the flip tool or the mirror tool. So you click on your object, you click the flip button, and then you select the arrows of the way you would like to flip the object. So I want to flip it front to back, essentially. So that has flipped it front to back. And very quickly, I'm going to refer to my other project. We're 65 by 75 on this one. So we're done flipping. We're going to go 75 wide, 65 deep, and if you'll remember, it was 150 high. Now you can see by making those changes, it's not aligned to center on the red rectangle. And I'm going to also go ahead and change the color of this so that you see this as three different parts, three different shapes. So again, we want to use our work plane tool, and we want to put it on the surface, on this surface of the red block, and then select our yellow wedge. And if we grab this cone, we can see that it had started at a -20. It was sunk into that rectangle by 20 millimeters. So we want to set this again to 0 and hit enter, and it'll bring it out so that it is now flush with that work plane, which is on the face or the surface of that rectangular prism. All right, so I'm going to return my work plane back to the original work plane. And I need to go ahead and align all of my objects. Okay, I want them all centered relative to each other. So I'm going to click and drag, well, click, hold, and drag, I should say. I'm going to select all of those shapes, and I'm going to go back to my align tool, and I'm going to align them left to right. So now what we have is a combination of three shapes that are the beginning pieces of the stand that I am trying to make. Now you can see that they're kind of off of this work plane. Again, if I want to get some relative size to my print bit area, I can recenter this on the work plane and see that it is going to fit when I print it at full size. It'll fit just fine in my within the capabilities of my printer. Again, because I set those in the edit grid option at the beginning of the project. Okay. So now things are going to get a little crazier. We're going to have a lot of parts moving around. We're going to be centering a lot of parts relative to other parts. And I find it very useful to go ahead and select, once I'm happy with how these are adjusted, I'm going to go ahead and select them all again by clicking, holding, and dragging over them, and then grouping them together so that they form one shape. Okay, one shape all together. All right, and now we're going to start working on this shape to fashion the iPhone stand. So really, all that's left for us to do is to begin making or creating some negative space, or carving bits and pieces out of this block to create the actual item that we are hoping to make. Okay, so the first thing that I need to do is I need to add a little ledge down here for my phone to sit on. And while some people might accomplish this by building another shape here, I actually found it much easier to simply come up to my box tool. Okay, I'm going to use my work plane tool, and I'm going to establish this surface, this angled surface, as my work plane. Okay, and then I'm going to bring my box tool out, and I'm going to set my box on this work plane. Now, if I hadn't done that, it would have set that box flat down here on my original work plane. So now I have a nice parallel beginning of a negative space that I can create. So this negative space, I'm going to oversize it so that I'm sure I'm deleting as much of that material out as I need to. I find that if you really try to match these up millimeter for millimeter, there are some small pieces of the material that are left over in the model. And so I'm going to kind of exaggerate all of my measurements a bit. So we know that this is 75 from one side to the other. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do 90 wide, and then I'm going to center both of these pieces together. Okay, so you can see it overhangs. That's good. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and make this piece, let's go ahead with, I don't know, we'll go 200 high. So let's go ahead and go 200 high. Okay, and if I zoom way out, you can see that it's like way more than we need it to be, but I have found that it's just useful, especially with your negative spaces, if they're spilling over into open space that does not have material in it. it's a good idea to do this. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this guy down a little bit. Okay. This part I'm kind of doing by eye shot. I'm not really worried about, you know, the perfect measurement from the base to the lip. Really kind of arbitrary. So here we are. We have this negative space, and it's actually sitting on the surface of this angled plane. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to sink that down into the angled plane, the thickness of my smartphone. And the thickness of my smartphone happens to be about 11 millimeters. But again, I'm going to overshoot this, and I'm going to go with 15 millimeters. Okay? So it's 15 millimeters deep, but it's sitting, if you look here, at the 0 mark. It's sitting at the 0 mark, and I want to get rid of or delete 11 millimeters worth of space from that plane. But you see what happens if I put a positive number in there, it actually pulls it out and away from the plane. We want it to sink down into the plane. So we're going to put a negative 11. And you can see that it has started to carve away at that plane. So this is great. I'm going to go ahead and click, hold, and drag to select everything. And I'm going to group those parts together. So now you can see that plane is still intact, right? It's separate from our new surface above the lip of our piece. And what we need to do now is return our work plane to its original state. All right, so the phone is going to sit along this plane. It'll kind of lean back standing up. And just noticed what I'd like to do is I'm going to ungroup these items, and I'm going to move this guy. I'm going to move him up just a little bit. So let me undo all the way back to where my plane was present. I want to move this up just a little bit. I want to give myself enough meat down here at the base of the object for the USB cord to pass down and under the object. So again, I'm going to double check, make sure I'm negative 11 from my work plane. We're all good to go. Let me select that again, group them together, and return my work plane back to its original state. So we're well on our way at this point. What I need to do now is I need to delete a circle for this charger. Okay, so I went ahead and took the measurements of the charger, and I found them to be about 99.5 millimeters in diameter. Okay, so if I bring my cylinder tool out here, actually I wanted to select a cylinder hole. You can see what it wants to do is it wants to drop it right on that blue work plane. That is not going to work. Now, you could rotate this, but chances of you finding that exact angle are very slim. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to get rid of that, and I'm going to use, once again, my work plane tool, and I want to cut into this surface here. So I'm going to go ahead and lay my work plane on there. Okay, if we look at this perspective, we can see it's not here on the front of this lip, but it's on the surface of the slanted spot where the phone's going to lean. And now I can bring my cylinder tool out, and you can see it's going to drop it flat on the work plane. Go ahead and set my diameter to what I measured the part to be, 99.5. I'll bring it down here. Now I've found with my phone that the charger itself has to sit a little bit higher up than you would expect in order for it to make proper contact and start charging. I'm going to want to center this with the stand. So we'll go ahead and align again. Very minute adjustment. And then what we need to do is click off of the object and select just the hole. And this part is 10 millimeters high. So you can see right now, if I rotate my plane around, you can see that it is sitting on the plane at 0. So the bottom of this hole is sitting on the top of the plane at 0, but I need it to be 10 millimeters into this new plane. So I'm going to put a -10 in there, and I'm going to hit enter. Okay, and you can see what it's done is it has sunk that hole down into the object. And again, if I go ahead and group these items, you can see that it put a nice circle in there. Now, let's look very closely at this, because the charger itself is a perfect circle. But if you look at what TinkerCAD is doing, it's taking a polygonal shape, right? And it's just increasing the number of sides on that shape. But I want it to be nice and perfectly round so that my charger fits in there. So I'm going to go ahead and ungroup those items, and I'm going to select my hole. And if I increase the number of sides and the number of segments, it's going to give me a much more round and perfect circle. So I'll go ahead and select all those, group them together again. And you can see it's a much rounder circle that's cut into this object now. Okay, hang in there with me. Just a couple more things to do, and then our stand is going to be finished. What we need to do is we need to make room for the USB cable to plug into the charger. So we're going to need to make a cut here. And then we're going to need to bore a hole the entire way through the center of this out the back so that we can get it plugged in. Okay, so the charger I have found is 11 millimeters wide. So again, here is my work plane tool. I'm actually going to put it not on this surface, but instead on the inside surface. Because when I bring my box tool out to cut my 11 millimeter hole, I want it to be sitting flat on this surface so that it's flush. Okay? So I'm going to increase the height of this. And again, we're going to overshoot here, and we're going to say, let's go with 60 and see what that does for us. We'll drag that down. We're not quite there, and you can see we need to pull the height of this object out a little bit as well. So that's set at 20. We'll go ahead and set that to 40. That'll bring it all the way out, and we'll bump this up. Let's just go ahead and play it safe with 100, not 10, and drag it down. So now you can see we're cutting the whole way through from the circle to the bottom of the base of the object. Okay, we want to go ahead and align these once again, keeping everything nice and neat. Let's try that again. So negative space and shape, and we'll click align, and we'll get them lined up like so. So I'm going to go ahead and group these items together. That will cut out that negative space. So this is now where the USB cable is going to pass down through. And the last thing that we want to do is bore a hole straight through this object. And so how we're going to do that is we're going to return our work plane back to its original state. I'm going to bring out a cylinder because they are easier for me to work with. I'm going to rotate this cylinder 90 degrees on its side. I'm going to turn this cylinder in its shape options into a hole. And again, we're going to overshoot here. And we're going to make this cylinder, we'll just go big, and we'll go with 200 millimeters. You can see that it punches the entire way through the object. Now, we're going to want to tinker with the size or dimensions of this cylinder to get more of looks to be like a round roof shape here. And we probably don't need it to be 20 millimeters wide and 20 millimeters high. So let's try 11 by 11. And we'll bring this back up. And we will align everything to center. And then the last thing we have to do is group our items. And you can see now we have a nice channel down the middle. Maybe a little bit too aggressive. You can see that it's cut out into the object a little bit. So I'll probably go back and clean that up. Make sure that all of these negative objects are center aligned. So let's ungroup this. Pick this and the rectangle. Let's get them all aligned so that we're nice and uniform and evenly spaced. And then we're going to go ahead and group them all together. And that is how you use your work planes to make a nice, perfect, again, for those of you who are OCD, a nice, perfect, sloped plane set of shapes work together nicely. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. I'm here to help. I hope that this was helpful in understanding how work planes work.